Hi there, welcome back to Supercharge Fridays. Joining us live, we're going to have a fantastic conversation with a barrister, Kolarele Sonaike, and we're going to talk about the art, the craft, the science of storytelling, specifically when it comes to job interviews. So if you're watching live, do me this gigantic favor. Tell me in the comments, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, that you are here, you're watching live, things are working as they should. I have to do this, even though I've been doing this almost 3 years, because, technology, sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's not. So while we wait, because I know there's always a 30-40 second delay between going live and actually, getting a notification that we are live, I wanted to say two things. Number one, there was this horrible announcement today. I'm sure you saw it, whether or not you're on Twitter or LinkedIn, about Twitter, the company Twitter, that it's going to be sending an email at 9 a.m. Pacific, which is in a couple of hours, today on Friday. Classic move, very classy Twitter. And imagine you're a Twitter employee and you're going to find out, do you have a job or not with the company? And the subject is going to say your role at Twitter. Oh my God. Listen, you have certain rights. Okay. It just so happens that the person we're going to be speaking with is not only a barrister, but he was kind enough to be on my LinkedIn Live exactly 1 year ago. And we talked about employment rights that you have. It doesn't matter if you work in a large company like Facebook or Twitter or small company, because the point is not all large companies know what they're doing. Am I right, Kola? And this is the first thing. I'm going to make sure I link that broadcast. It was such an education. We had tech issues, but we made it work. The second thing I wanted to say is the topic of job interviews is not going to go away, right? No matter who's interviewing you, maybe except robots. I'm going to be doing a live training somewhere in the like third, fourth week of March. March. Hello, November. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter, which I have to admit has been a bit dormant for a little while, but I'm going to be announcing it first to my lovely email subscribers. So if you want to learn more about interviews, there's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to share. It's going to be free. I'm going to have a program in it as well with a Facebook, group support, all of that. But you don't have to buy the program if you don't want. You'll get a lot of value from the free training as well. So make sure you join. I can see comments. So it looks like we're live. And without further ado, let us talk now about the art and science of storytelling for job interviews. And welcome, Kala. Hey, Kala, welcome to Supercharge Fridays. It's so good to have you back.
So now, great to be back. Also, that we don't have tech issues this time, so we're all comfortable in our seats rather
Thank you for
than
saying that.
scrambling
You
and
make me
sweating.
a little nervous now. No, this is going to be good. So Kola, for anyone who's not very familiar with you, I'd love a quick intro before we get into the meat of the topic in terms of who you are, what you do, because you wear a couple of hats, which are really interesting.
Yeah, I do indeed. Probably the most important is that I'm a West Ham supporter for any of the football fans out there. So that quick intro there.
I'm trying so hard not to roll my eyes.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm a barrister, which means that I specialize in commercial litigation, employment cases. That's why you and I spoke last year. I can't believe it was last year
I know.
on employment issues. I'm also a communication skills coach, which is really what I'm going to be focused on today. Just really helping people who are good at what they do in terms of their work, their business, but who know that they need to be better at how they communicate and interact with people. So I kind of help them with that. And then there are a few other things I do as well, but that's probably kind of the most important ones for us today.
Okay, that's amazing. And I'm also saying this to the audience. First of all, thank you for joining. You guys are amazing. When you say that's so horrible, I'm guessing you're talking about Twitter, not about us, not about the topic. Just clarifying. But I'm also saying this to our lovely audience. Thank you for being here. Kola has had a fabulous career as well, and we talked about Kola's career journey. In case that's something of interest, check out. I will link a podcast episode that I did with Kola, which did really well because it's a very relatable feeling, going from one area to another. You studied philosophy and you were like, oh, I think I want to do law now. Oh, so amazing. So, Kola, keeping in mind that you do this for a living, meaning you stand in front of people, you give these speeches, and you talk about a lot of stories when it comes to your clients, etc. You see some very smart people, right? And you also see not so smart, but the smart ones, we live under this curse that we know everything. We know what we're doing. So when it comes to storytelling, talk to us about what do some of the smart ones amongst us, we will never admit that we don't know something, right? Because there is that lack of self-awareness. What do some of us get wrong about storytelling?
Oh, there's quite a few things, but one of
Your
the
sigh already like was the answer, like the answer I
yeah,
was looking for.
yeah, no, it's probably because I'm very passionate about it, and I'm also a bit of a purist. So I always try and make sure I'm not getting too in the weeds with
Okay.
this stuff. In terms of mistakes that people make, so some people who think they are storytellers, the big mistake they make is actually just going on too long. So storytelling is really powerful, but there is a balance between a story that is short and to the point and so keeps everybody's attention, and a story that just rambles on, where you have detail that really isn't necessary. The point is a bit obscure, and it ends up being that the person just likes the sound of their own voice. So that kind of storytelling is just annoying. And in an interview context, it's a killer, because
It
you
is.
start to get people just kind of, okay, can't wait for this to end. And yeah, definitely not going to have this person in because they're too into themselves. They like the sound of their own voice. They're not letting us get a word in edgeways. So that's one of the big mistakes I would say people make if they think wrongly that they are great storytellers.
Okay.
But really, actually, the key mistake I would say that most people make is not using stories enough, because storytelling is so powerful on so many different levels. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it. And actually, I really want people to think in terms of having stories available to them that they can use. Because there was a Stanford research paper that showed that basically stories are 22 times more likely to be remembered than facts and data alone.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
in itself should tell you kind of you've got to go much more into storytelling.
100%. 100%. So I want to recap a couple of things you said because both are very kind of in your face, and I'm glad you're saying this. And feel free to nerd out with us. We like that here on
Okay.
Superchat
All right.
Friday. Backed with data, of course. Their stories. We will remember your stories more than we will remember the data, as the Stanford research says. But nevertheless, it kind of it solidifies, right? It's not an anecdotal thing that Kola just thought of, like waking up this morning. It's backed with facts. So the two things you said was the narcissism in us, like, I don't know if I spelled that right, it likes giving our voice maximum airtime. Imagine a radio show, guest host, whatever. So I want to stay here for a minute. Kala, what would be, according to you, as a communication expert, I don't want to make you nervous because the word expert makes me nervous, but what, according to you, would be a good balance of airtime between the interviewee and the interviewer?
So I actually I like people to think of it as slightly different. So not a person must do 60% versus 40%, but connection. So whenever you hear me talk about communication, I'm always talking about your job is to make a connection through your communication. Once you make that connection, that's when the magic happens. And that's when it doesn't really matter who's doing the bulk of the talking if people feel connected to each other. When
Ah,
you do that, then even if you're the one speaking most of the time, you can still feel that the other person is completely engaged. And so they won't look at it as that person did all the talking. Whereas if you aren't connected, then even if you're speaking only 20% of the time, when you speak those 20%, it just doesn't land and doesn't really connect, doesn't really work. So I want people to always think more about connection. Now, part of that will mean if you spend all the time talking, it's difficult to connect because the other person isn't getting in to put their input, to interact, to give their perspective, to give you something to work with. So really, I would say think more in terms of can I feel that when I am speaking, especially when I'm telling a story, that person really is engaged. So although I'm speaking, I'm looking more at, are they listening, or do I need to speed it up, or do I need to cut it down? Do I need to give them a chance to interact where it looks like they were about to say something, but I kind of cut them off because I carried on talking, that kind of thing.
Oh, and the cutting off and the interruptions. Oh, we love that when we are in that situation. So I'm getting some amazing comments. Fantastic. Hi, LinkedIn user. I'm checking out who you are. Sharmeen, I think. Yes, we like him. We like him a lot. This is why we keep getting him back. So this was the first thing that you said a lot of smart people get wrong in terms of narcissism and airtime. I have to admit here, Kola, this is an interesting learning for me, because I tend to tell my clients that the more senior the role and the more advanced you are in the process of interviewing, like, final stages, make them talk more. So it could be, but you're saying it could also be that it doesn't really matter as long as the quality is connect, the content is connecting and landing well. So that's very interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah. So, if you think about a movie that you love, right? I'll bet you're not thinking about how long that movie was. You just love it, right? So
My
it could be a
all-time favorite, Lord of the Rings. I don't know. I think it's just shy of 3 hours.
yeah, right. So there you go. So that's incredibly long movie, but you're in there, and because you're completely absorbed, the time flies. It really didn't matter how long or short. It could be a short movie, and you're like, wow, that was fantastic. So that's why I say it's not so much about how long you're going on for. It's just what's the value of what you are offering, and
Right.
do people feel connected to it? And once they do, then that really is the key. And that's also why storytelling is so powerful. Because, bit of nerding out again, there was a Princeton University study that really did it kind of studied the brainwaves of a person telling a story and the brainwaves of the audience listening to the story. And they realized that within kind of like a minute or so, their brainwaves matched because they were just totally connected. It put them both in the same space. So that's, again, why storytelling is just so powerful, to make a connection with people.
It's amazing. And the proof is there. You're saying our brains just perk up and you're like, ooh, shh, shh.
Yeah.
He's telling a story. I want to hear. So that's amazing. I'm glad I asked about this. So the narcissism and the airtime, about we want to hog it a bit more. It's a problem. I had this problem. I had this problem. I think I learned a lot just before I started the podcast. Thank goodness. And I got feedback from a very dear family member. We're like, listen more. It really stung me, Kola, when he told me this. It really stung me. But my life has been completely changed. I know it sounds dramatic, because I heard this feedback about listening more. And I was like, I don't have to be the first one to speak. I don't have to share everything. Give it in drip, give it in bite sized pieces. It's going to land much better. Amazing, amazing. And I'm so glad you reminded. And the second, very obvious one, were not so obvious to a lot of us, is not using stories can be detrimental to how we are performing in interviews, and how we are, like, how are we, like, what is the recollection. So let's get into it, Kola. So I'm just going to check if we have any questions. um Hey, hi there. How do you sign up? No problem. I'm going to share the link with you. Just keep your eyes peeled on the screen. Because I don't want to, interrupt the flow. And Leon says, at times, interviews are done too quickly. I don't get it. And once you overshare, you might as well wrap, and you can't get the time back, Leon. So I completely agree with that as well. So now, Kola, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this, right? Wait, let's talk about what your favorite tips are, just below the surface. We're not talking enough about it. If we're talking enough about it, we're not doing enough about it. You know this because you work a lot with clients around the world. So a couple of your favorite tips, and if anyone wants to dig deeper, I highly recommend reaching out to Kola, because this is what you do, right? So we are all ears, all eyes. I got my chai with me. Cheers. If anyone's drinking tea or anything else, no judgment. Let's get started, Kola.
Yeah. So as I said, people actually don't use stories enough. And one of the reasons, I think, is actually that the idea of storytelling, what I've seen from a lot of my clients, just from research, is that people just feel other people can do it, but I can't. Or you have to be a natural. And because I'm not a natural, I'm just not going to go there. And, I'm just not going to do it. Or I don't really know how to do it. So I'm just not going to touch it. So the first thing, my first recommendation to people, and I do this with all my clients, is get yourself a story bank. Now, a story bank is just any form, can be electronics. I put everything on my database. I use an app called Notion. It can be, I used to use a spreadsheet. You can do a Word document. You can have a paper, notebook, whatever it is. And all it is you just think about, okay, what are all the stories that I know from anywhere? It could be, I heard a great story about Mahatma Gandhi and what he did as a result, or what lesson it taught us. I'm going to make a note of that. It could be stories from my own childhood, from what happened when I proposed to my wife, or when I had an accident where I nearly died, and what lessons came of it, including, especially in a work context, the stories of your work life. What happened in that job that shows my attitude towards teamwork or towards leadership, or how I overcome adversity. All of these little snippets of stories, something happened and it showed this, something happened, or this was the situation and it taught us that. Write them down. And what you will find, what everybody finds, is they have loads and loads of stories actually available to them that they already know really well, because most of the time they lived it, or it's something they've heard that they love, that speak to lots and lots of different areas that you may then be asked in interview. One of the, I hate this question, but it's always asked, what is your weakness, right? And it's like, oh gosh, come on, okay, fine. But here's the thing. When people ask that, a typical answer is, things like, oh, I'm too meticulous. And it's like, that's not a weakness, right?
I'm a perfectionist. I can't delegate.
Yeah, it's like, that's not a weakness. So it ends up coming across as insincere or inauthentic.
Yeah.
And that's because people are worried, gosh, if I admit to a weakness, then, I'm going to look weak. It's going to be bad. So here's a little example of what I mean by the value of storytelling. The way to turn a question like that into a strength for you is to actually admit to a genuine weakness that you have had in the context of a story. So, I was really bad. My favorite one, I was really bad at communication. Here's an example of what happened. I was in a meeting and my boss had to take over the pitch halfway through because I was so terrible, right? So you actually admit to a genuine weakness that you have. The key then is, and what you did about it, or what you're currently doing about it, even if it's still a weakness. Because what that does is turn it into a strength, because then you're saying, I am human, of course, and I'm not afraid to admit where I am weak, but I'm also the kind of person that is doing something about it. And so it turns what would be perceived as a genuine weakness into an actual strength that sends the story to your interviewer that, hey, this is a person that really we should want here, because they're really good from all the things that we can see on their CV, but also, even in terms of weaknesses, they have a really good ethos of self-development, self-assessment. That's the kind of person we want in the company. So if you work out your story on lots and lots of different areas, then that's really going to help you when you go in, because you'll have those stories in your mind, as opposed to you get into the interview and you're, oh, I have to tell stories. Let me think of one on the spot. No one can do that, right? Literally no one. So that's kind of, I would say one of my biggest tips is to actually get your story bank, prepare it, make a note. And once you do, you'll kind of just have them more accessible in your mind.
I love this tip. And I want to add here, because we don't do this. Firstly, someone who's watching it are like, that's good. What else? What else? Wait. We'll get there. There's a lot of stuff. But the point here is, mental note is BS. Let me make a mental note. I don't know, Kola, if you agree, because I forget in an hour.
Yeah.
So I have to agree with you so strongly, because I'm a person who's a notebook person. Like, I'm a notebook whore. I have like, I don't know, at least 24 notebooks, because I love writing with a pen, journal, diary, whatever. The point is, it is not always around when something occurs, which is why I like the idea of a very simple app, the Notes app or any app, you said Notion, because the phone is almost always with us. So putting all of that down on an app somewhere, you've got it, and then you can, if you want to transfer it later, you do, but you'll be easily able to find, which you don't always find, like with me, like the journal thing. Control F, I can't find a physical journal, but Control F, I can find that folder on my phone. So that bank, I think, is literally a bank, because it's got this wealth of stories and knowledge that are actually going to make you look good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see, by the way, a question
Yeah.
from Alice Coma, I think it is.
I saw it as well. It's a good question. And before we move on to the second one, let's talk about this, because I think it's a juicy one. Alice, how can you explain in the interview, when you had a year of not doing anything in college, because you were undergoing depression? If you're asking this about yourself, Alice, I'm sorry that you went through a difficult time. And how can we use storytelling, Kola, to help Alice?
Yeah, so really great question, and same thing, Alice. It's, I think, now this year more than ever, I think we appreciate the impact and the seriousness of mental health, challenges. So we all get it. So Alice, I'm going to answer this question, which I think is what you're saying, on the basis of, in the past you had a period in your CV you kind of feel you need to explain, and now you know what to say, but how do you deal with it? So that's again another good example of where storytelling really works. As long as you have yourself understood and come to terms with, well, what did that teach me? Or
Mm.
how did that build my strength, my capacity? So, and I always tell people that stories don't have to have happy endings. This was kind of one of the other tips I was going to go on to. Stories don't have to have happy endings. In fact, the stories that have sad endings or bad endings or negative endings actually end up, there's some research on this, just a little bit, that actually end up being more motivational to people or spur people to action far more than stories that have happy endings. The story that has a happy ending, it's kind of, oh, well, everything resolved in the end, so don't really have to think about it too much. A story with a negative ending forces you to kind of psychologically want to do something different or better. So if you can say things like, there was a period, they say, hey, look, there's a 1 year gap in your CV. What happened there? And you're honest about it, say, look, to be honest, I actually had a problem, or I had a bit breakdown, or whatever it is. And this is what I went through, and actually caused this. And you put it in the form of a story. And then again, you say, and from that, I learned that you have to be disciplined or resilient, or have to focus on personal development or your personal health, or whatever the lesson is that you say you took out of that story. You again turn what could be a negative or a weakness into a positive of, this person is authentic, this person told the truth, this person is learning and developing themselves. And that is the kind of person that we want here. Because most of all in interviews, what people are looking for is not, do they have the perfect CV, or do they even have a good answer to the questions I asked, but can I see them in this role? And if you give them the stories that once the interview is over, that they'll be playing in their heads, that's the stuff that will make the difference as to whether they say, yes, we want to give this person a chance of the job, or no, we think there's somebody else. Is what are the stories you give them to replay in their heads once the interview is over?
Okay, this was very, very useful, because the number of times this question comes up is, there's so many different ways to answer. One is on the content side of things, which is a little bit different because it's much deeper than what we're talking about today. But I'm really glad you said this, and my mind is blown, because it's true. We do get much more motivated when we see stories with not so happy endings, because we want to know, what was the learning there, what was the silver lining there, what did you get out of it? And it's like you redefined, because of the learning, the end was actually not the end. I took back control, and then I made it like this, and that can be post facto, right? Because the actual, like, meat of the story is over. So that's amazing. So hopefully, Alice, this has been useful for you. I also wanted to add to that, because there was a very interesting comment here. LinkedIn user, feel free to, like, identify yourself, because I'm trying to see it on my phone at the same time. It really helps when you have an idea of what you're going to say, and not just an idea, but some sort of script not for memorizing. Kola, you talked about this as well during my podcast, but also, you and I, by the way, Kola has an amazing podcast called the Great Speech Podcast. If you are interested in communication, you've got to check it out. I'll make sure I put that link as well in the comments. Please check out my LinkedIn comments if you're watching me on Facebook and YouTube, because I'm a little bit more partial and time is limited. One of the things that you talked about was being ready with something like a script, because when you prepare, it's easier. And a great example of that is, Kola, you have a podcast, I have a podcast. We have a pretty good idea what we're going to say when we do solo episodes, especially if we don't have that, we're waffling.
Yeah.
People will switch off. They're going to find something else to do. We're losing a listener, and that's the currency in today's world: attention. Whether you're a podcast host, whether you're a candidate for a job interview, right?
Completely. And the thing is, though, being prepared, as you said, it's not the same as I know verbatim what I'm going to say, and I've rehearsed it, and I know which word is going to be where. It's not the same as that. In fact, I really emphasize to people, don't do that. I always say, internalize your message, don't memorize it, right? So know it so well internally that you could talk, somebody could wake you up at 3 a.m. and say, go, and you could start talking about it because you just know it so well. But you will use different words every single time you say it. So really, really important to be prepared, because there's just so much that, 90% of questions in an interview are entirely predictable. Right?
Yes.
They really are, because there's only so much you can do. The really clever ones, sometimes some companies have, different scenarios they are.
The gotcha questions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But generally, questions are predictable. And even if it's not the specific words, it's what are the topic areas they're going to cover? What happened? What about, tell me about this gap in your CV? What's your weakness? That kind of thing, right? So you really have an opportunity to prepare, okay, these are the things I'm going to cover. And what I say about stories is just have your stories for all those scenarios.
Yes.
Something that shows leadership, something that shows weakness overcoming, adversity, teamwork, those kind of scenarios that are the kinds of things people might cover. Or what kind of role they're going to, ask you're looking to go into. Let's say it's a technical IT role. It's, okay, how did we deal with this program glitch, in my current employment? That shows them what they should expect where you are. So the more you prepare beforehand, so that if this issue comes up, I know that I've got 2-3 stories that I can use at any point. And then practice them so that you can tell that story in 30 seconds or in
practice. Because I think one of the things you said during my podcast with you was also wing it. I'm just gonna wing it. You said worst advice has never been shared. Nobody should wing it. Not even Tom Cruise in Maverick. Okay, no one should wing it.
I haven't seen that yet, but I'm gonna go see that.
But you haven't seen Maverick? I am shocked.
I haven't. No.
But you've seen Top Gun 1, right?
Oh yeah. No.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay. We can be friends. Oh my gosh.
Be my wingman anytime. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So I see 2 more questions, Bharat and Sakib. I promise we're going to get back to you. I just want to continue with some of the other tips, and maybe your question gets answered in the meantime. And if it doesn't, we will definitely be talking about it. So this was, a big important tip. Get a story bank. Keep in mind, when you have difficult situations you need to share, they don't always have to have happy endings. What else, Colin?
So I talked about practice, so I kind of mentioned it there.
Yeah.
But I really want to emphasize that. So it's one thing to have your story bank, which is just think about the things, and you'll find you have 20, 30 stories of things that have happened or you've been through that have a lesson attached, right? But having those is not enough. You need to actually be able to use them. And if you go into an interview and that's the first place you try out the story, you may be lucky and get it right, but chances are you will either miss points. And there's nothing worse actually than you start telling a story, you kind of lose your thread, right? Or somebody asks you a question and then it's interrupted and like, oh gosh, what do I say? Or you get to the end and you realize there wasn't really a point to the story. So practice. And I always say practice in how things would be in the real world, which is you can do it in 30 seconds, right? Or you can do it in 2 minutes, or you can do it in 5 minutes. You can jump from one place to another and still retain the thread. So just kind of know what are the points of the story. When I do go deep into storytelling, I really talk about a 5-part structure to a great story. And actually, you see this in pretty much every story, from The Lion King to Star Wars to, little anecdotes. But if you want to keep it basic, just think in terms of beginning, middle, and end, right? Beginning is, this is the situation. Middle is, and then this happened. End is, and this is how it was resolved, good or bad.
Amazing. I'm just going to pause you for a second. When you said 5-part, would that be something you'd be open to sharing here?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
you've got us intrigued, and we want to know more.
Listen, I will share. I'm fairly certain I've got a link to it. I obviously did a podcast on it. I'm fairly certain.
It's something that takes time
So yeah,
to. Okay.
definitely. I'll share that with you.
Okay, amazing, amazing. So I think this is it's so key, and I just wrote down. Listen, the story bank is useless if you don't actually. It's like having money in the bank and you don't spend it. It just sits there, right? It's got no value. But as obvious as this may seem, please do not let the interview be the first time you actually test the delivery of the thing. We all, whether we work in a software company, we do testing, and if Amazon is going to deliver the first package ever, it's not going to be like the real one to a customer. It's going to be a dummy. We all do this for everything. We test something before we, even whether it's a car or I don't know, it's not coming in my head right now, but we kind of want to know what it's like, and most things have a 30-day trial period or whatever. So why can't we do that type of testing for something which is even more high stakes, like an interview? And you mentioned, Kola, that one of your favorite ways to do it is to record yourself with a phone and then play back. And what is your twitching, what are your eye movement like? It feels awkward. Like, you still recommend that?
Yeah, so there are different ways I recommend if you really want to do it. So firstly, yeah, smartphone, great feature, great kind of device, right? Stick it up on a wall, prop it up on a windowsill and just talk into it. And important is, talk through your mistakes. So don't start again, talk again. Just talk through your mistakes. So say I'm going to do 2 minutes and just try and do it. You make a hash of it, doesn't matter. Go all the way through. Because what you're doing is you're training your brain to say, hey, I'm going to have to do this in real time one day. So I'm going to practice like I'm doing it in real time. Like my daughter's practicing her piano. So I've got a piano here at the back. And she practices looking down at her fingers. I'm like, no, I know it's harder to do it without looking at your fingers, but that's how you're going to have to do it when you're doing exams and stuff. So make sure you look at the music, not at your fingers. So practice in the way that it would likely be in the real world. Then watch it back, see what's going on, take it on the tube and listen to it, just audio, and get a sense of how you sound, how you come across. And then
That is
if you
so
can,
key.
yeah, that's a really good one, especially if you're trying to learn it, not verbatim, but just internalize it, right? So just put it in your ears. I go for walks, you're on the tube, and just listen to yourself telling that story. And that it puts it into your brain in a different way. And
I
then
think
the other
that's,
way of
yeah.
practicing is do it with somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? So actually say, hey, listen, I'm about to have an interview. Can you just play interviewer with me and ask me certain questions and practice with them, get used to what it's like to deliver when somebody's there, their feedback, that kind of thing.
Yeah, very, very key. You made me think of something because I do this and I didn't realize I do it. So, firstly, with my son as well, with the piano as well, this works really well. I'm in a choir and we practice every Sunday. And whenever we get a new song, right, we've got the paper, we've got the music on it. We hold on to it like a baby holds on to a pacifier. It's a security blanket. But after going through 4 or 5 sessions, 4 or 5 weeks, the conductor tells us to put the paper down. I love putting the paper down. I love making those mistakes because then I go back and I'm like, which is the word that I kept getting wrong? Or which is the word I kept skipping in this part? Oh, on the chorus. Oh, in the verse. Because if I don't do that, when the time comes for the actual performance, you look around, the ones who are sweaty and nervous are the ones who held on to it because those conditions were not realistic. They were very ideal conditions, but you want to have real life concert conditions or interview conditions during practice. So
Yeah,
This
Yeah.
is key.
I'm just getting over the shock of you're in the choir. What? How did I
Yeah.
not do this?
Oh my gosh, this is like free therapy for me. I've got to do it for like 4, 5 years.
But
There's another shock. How can you not have seen like Maverick? Okay, Jean-Luc is like, man, no. I mean, Jean-Luc doesn't speak like that. I don't know
listen, I
Jean-Luc.
will see it. I've got to wait for it to come out on whatever. I don't know.
And Paula's like, I hate Wing It. Oh my gosh, I've done it. It's cringeworthy. I don't. It's horrible. I felt bad for the other person when I winged it, in terms of how it sounds. I'm gonna quickly get into the question. So Bharat says, because I interrupted you. Sorry, I briefly interrupted you earlier, Kola. He says, how do you get back on track? Because you did, but not everyone's a pro. How do you get back on track when you're interrupted telling a story that answers an interview question? And is it different online versus offline?
Yeah, so really good question again. The
Yeah.
first thing I would say is just think whether you really need to go back to the story, right? Because if they've asked a question in the middle of you saying a story, that is the thing that is on their mind at that point. So think about whether actually I should go with the tangent that they're taking me on, or I should go down this road because that's where they want to go. So don't think in terms of I have to say the thing that I was saying. Remember, communication is about connection. And if that's what at that moment is in that person's mind, go with it, right? Now, if it was just a question that, it wasn't, they wanted to take you down a track and they're happy for you to come back to your story, then just, again, this is where the value of having internalized the story lies. If you know something so deeply, so well, you've practiced it, then actually wherever you are stopped, you can just go back, and you can just go back to where you remember, or you can ask and say, oh, I just lost my train of thought. What was the last point of my story? And if they remember, great, they help you. If they don't, it's like, oh my goodness, I think we're both, I'm sorry, I'm so into this, I've kind of lost track. You kind of just make it a feature and then just go on. So don't worry that, oh, I must give the story that I started halfway through if that's not where it's going. And just kind of take yourself back. Most
Good.
of all, people
Good.
are, when you get a connection with somebody, they accept mistakes, they accept eccentricities, they accept vulnerabilities because they feel like this is another human that I can see in the role. So I would say don't over worry about it.
Don't over worry. And I like that you're saying also, even though they are the ones who interrupted you, there's no need to remind people of it, no need to finger point. And don't be too attached to the story unless you didn't get to the point, and the point is where you want the point you wanted to make. And Kola, you shared great tips on how you get back to it. And lastly, what I'm going to say here is, 1 second. Oh my gosh, 1 second. I lost that. Don't be too attached to it. Oh my god, I hate it when these brain farts happen. Yeah. Don't be attached to it. Train of thought. Yeah. Sometimes the moment has passed,
Exactly.
and the story, like you said, is no longer relevant to the direction in which the conversation is headed. The bus has left the station.
Yeah.
So you
Exactly.
move on, you get on a train or you get on a plane or whatever.
Yeah.
So and does this make a difference? Does it make a difference in terms of like where we are, online, Zoom, or in person in a conference room?
I mean, it doesn't make a difference in terms of the principle. It's still know your story well enough. You can come back to it, go with where they're going if that's what it takes. Probably the advantage you have online is, and I don't recommend this, in terms of people having scripts, but is that you can have some notes at your desk,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, like on my board, I have stuff, behind the camera, for instance, just,
Yeah, but even in person, you can have a little
yeah,
notebook.
so you can have
And
that. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So you
Yeah.
can do that and you can feel, oh yeah, I can do that. But really, I don't think the principles are exactly the same,
Yeah.
whether it's online or offline. It's just making a connection.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I love that. And we have a question here from Sakib, which is interesting. Could you also help understanding how much should one emote? So there is content and then there's the delivery side of things. When you're storytelling in a formal corporate environment, like our expressions, emotions, does that impact as well in storytelling during job interviews?
Yes, it does. But what I would say is this: the key is authenticity. So if you are not naturally an uber expressive person, don't try and force it, because people will just be able to tell that this isn't natural. Equally, if you are an exuberant person, don't try and hide it too much, because people will say, there's something, well, they're holding something back. Didn't really trust that person, whatever it is. So as much as possible, you want to kind of think, if I was having a conversation with a good friend and I was telling this exact story, how would I tell it? And then you just basically try and do it that way. Generally, if you wanted a rule of thumb, which is kind of what I guess the question was going towards, it's the more positive, the more passionate, the more expressive you are. Like if you wanted to know where's the line, where should I fall, which side of the line, be more expressive and more passionate than negative or kind of a little bit placid or whatever it is, just because generally people relate better to people that they feel there is some degree of passion inside them, that they are positive outlook. And being expressive is a way of saying, hey, there's something to me, I'm animated. If I come into this role, I'm really going to go for it, that kind of thing. So generally, I would say be more passionate than kind of still, but just mainly be authentic, because actually people can spot that really easily.
They can, and don't do something that you normally naturally don't do. It'll make you uncomfortable, it'll make the other person uncomfortable. It's just overall awkward, and we don't want, the last thing we want for you is to feel awkward during an important conversation.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
I'll just give a quick example. So
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan is often talked of as the great communicator, as a president. And one of the things people don't realize about him is he never used his hands, right? He literally, if he was speaking, his hands would just be at the lectern, never used them. And yet people felt he was a great communicator, and that was just natural for him. So there's just no one way you have
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
considered as a good communicator.
I love that. I love that. I'm going to notice that. I didn't realize he never used his hands. So he's
Yeah,
basically using his facial expressions to get
yeah.
the point across. Okay. Okay. Amazing. Um, and another couple of very quick questions where I saw something about, I guess, when not to use stories, right? Joy says, do you need to tell a story to a question that you don't really have an answer to, or you've never experienced it before?
Great question. Yes. So don't wing it. Don't make up something, whether it's a story or a fact, if it's not actually the answer to the question or it really relates to the question. And again, on this kind of question of I don't really have an answer to it, it's going to happen in your life, whether in an interview, whether in a meeting, wherever it is, it's going to happen. And if you think that what people are looking for is an answer to every question that they asked, then you're going to feel, oh, I don't have the answer, I failed, or I'm flailing, whatever it is. But if you realize that actually what people want in an interview is, can I see this person in the role? Or what people want in a meeting is, do I have confidence that this person is doing the job or can do the job or will sort out the problem, whatever it is? Then you realize that it's not actually the answers to the questions that people want. It's really that feeling of, I believe in this person or I have confidence in them. Which means when you don't know the answer to a question that's asked, there's nothing wrong with actually, you know what, I'm actually not, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. Here are some of the factors I think are probably relevant so that we can work out the answer, and then you list those factors. Or if
Yeah.
you're in a meeting, I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but you know what, John, you've done something on this. Can I just ask for your perspective on this? And you become the
Oh,
facilitator in the meeting and turn it into a discussion that you are moderating, and then people still give you credit for having given the answer. It's amazing. It's like resharing a post on LinkedIn. People often think, oh, thanks for that share. You're like, I just shared what somebody else said.
yeah. No, I love this answer so much because it's like, if you don't get the job, you've got a great career ahead. I'm just speaking to the audience. If you don't get that job, in spite of getting these amazing tips from Sonal and Kola and Kola's expertise, if you don't get the job, you still have an amazing career ahead in politics. Because you notice when they don't know something or they don't want to answer something, deflect, deflect, deflect. And not, I'm joking, obviously, not in a cringy and sleazy way. But here, I like that you said, which very rarely politicians say, you know what, I actually don't know the answer to that question. Own it. It's not a big deal. You've got the chops, you're good at some things. And then show your thought process rather than the silence of, I don't know, full stop. Because
I
that's,
wish politicians would do that, because actually people would relate far more to that than
yes.
talking rubbish or spinning
And
something that.
then they will get the votes, which they ultimately, that's what they want, right? Want to be in power. But amazing, amazing. And then related to what we said a little bit earlier, sorry, I'm going to get back to Bharat, because Bharat has an interesting question related to what we just said about silence. How do you deal? I'm not going to read the whole question right now because we're getting over time. But what about silence? How can silence be your friend, Kola?
So the first thing I always tell people is don't be afraid of silence, right? Don't be so often people's impetus is to fill silence with noise.
Yeah.
And that's kind of just making noise, right? Literally, it's just making noise. So don't be afraid of silence. It's not necessarily indicative of there's nothing between you, you and the person. So therefore, that's why there's silence. Sometimes it can be they're gathering their thoughts. Sometimes it's just taking a pause for the moment, sometimes. So don't be afraid of that. But one of the other things, it's not necessarily a story thing, but I always recommend it for interviews, is have your bank of questions that
Hmm.
you want to ask.
Hmm.
And the reason that's positive or good in silent situations is you're not then just filling it with noise. You are filling it by kind of taking the interview forward. So, period of silence comes. So, listen, I'm not sure if this is the time for questions, but I've got a question I really think I'd like to know, or that could be important or relates to the point that you asked me. And then you ask a question that is a real question. So, not something that you don't really genuinely understand in the answer, but actually a real question about them or their company. Or, I love the question, things like, look, what for you would be success in this role in a year's time? Like if you looked a year's time, how would you say this person, whoever fills this role, would be a success? And then they start telling you, oh, well, we'd want them to show this and they'd achieve that. And that gives you some avenues to discuss those things with them so that they start to see you in the role.
Yeah. Yeah. We
So,
we came here for storytelling. We're getting way more than our money's worth. So if this has been helpful, I highly recommend, if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, check out this post on LinkedIn because I'm live on LinkedIn. Check out Kola's profile. I've tagged it. Follow Kola because there's a lot that Kola shares. A lot, much more than storytelling. So no, this is really helpful. And I think when people pause to answer, I genuinely have more respect for them than the one who is so keen to answer that the person didn't let me finish my question or my sentence, right? Because it's like it shows this quiet intelligence, which is in today's noisy world, frankly, seriously lacking. One last question, Kola, we're going to let you go. How do you link facts and proof during those storytelling, things and all the stories that you're sharing?
yeah, interesting question. I'm not entirely sure what the issue was that they're looking for, but what I would say is that you can think of stories and how they relate to facts and proof in kind of different ways. So very often a story, so stories should be fact based. I mean, unless you're telling a fictional story of, a movie or whatever it is, but it should be fact based in terms of, for
Mhm.
instance, we were running this department and then suddenly the pandemic hit and all of our sales went and our suppliers went and we were facing closure. But then we thought, why don't we try this product online? And we pushed ourselves into it and we did it and it was a smash hit, that kind of thing, right? So that's a fact-based story that helps you answer a question about how you face challenges and what your ethos is for overcoming challenges. So if that's what you're asking, Rakesh, a story should always be primarily this is what happened, these things, happen. Although it doesn't always have to be. So there's an experiment that was called the significant objects experiment, where a couple of, I think they were psychologists or scientists, took 200 household items like door stops and things like random objects that cost no more than about $1 to buy. And they then commissioned 200 writers to make up stories about those items. So, one would say, oh, this was given to me by my grandfather who got it from the war, and that kind of stuff, completely made up. And then they posted those objects on eBay and looked to see what they would sell those objects for. And they made something like I wrote it down somewhere. So they sold 200 items that cost them $263 to buy. And they sold, in fact, let me ask you, what do you think they sold them for? Okay, take a guess what you think the total was. From $263, what did they sell them all for? Oh, I can't hear you, by the way.
Bear with. Sorry, I have a very loud gardener next door, so I wasn't sure if you were hearing it. I also want to engage, please, in our audience, take advantage of this as well. This is fun. Before, and unfortunately, there's a delay. What do you think they sold it for? The selling price, right? If it's $263 to buy, what was the selling?
Yeah.
Type it quickly. Don't
Google. Don't Google.
Don't Google. And by the way, all of these stories, I highly recommend you rewatch the replay. Watch the replay. But a lot of studies, I think, Kola, you've at least you've brought up at least three studies during this conversation. So it's something you can easily find. I'm telling the audience, you can easily find on Google. So make sure you check that out because it'll be interesting. You would have learned something new today.
Yeah,
so
I'm a geek, I told you. So I research papers. Yeah.
So we have some answers coming already. Bharat says something like maybe 350 to 400. I was going to say $1,000. Kala, but I don't know. What is the answer? Because I can't wait.
The answer is $7,605.44.
Oh, wow.
Because of the power of stories. Because of the power of stories.
Because of the power of fake stories.
So fake stories in those examples, right? So it was an experiment. They didn't keep the money just as profit. It was actually an experiment. But the power of stories gave ordinary objects far more significance, which is why they called it significant object experiment. And therefore, people attached greater value to those objects and bought it for higher costs. It's really, it's like, buying memorabilia of, stuff from different people. There's a story attached to it. So I'm just giving that as an example of the power of story.
Amazing.
And, so the story may not be fact-based, but it can still be effective.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I have a couple of people who also kind of were nowhere near the mark that, you ended up sharing. So hopefully, Rakesh, this is helpful as well. But on a separate note, right, our resume is there for a reason. It's got a lot of facts and proof as well. So you don't have to embellish a lot of that within the storytelling. The storytelling is more, at least for me, Kala, it's a bit more the connection, which a piece of paper is less able to do. So, okay, this has been amazing. Is there anything else you wanted to share, Kola, before in terms of those tips?
Well, I was going to say, actually, on the point that you just made, which is definitely take your resume, right, your CV, and have a story for each part of it, right?
Yeah.
So for your the results that didn't go, your poor degree, right? Have a story for what you learned from that, or what you got out from that, or for why it was poor, but why you overcome it. From each role that you've been in, have different stories, so that anytime they talk about that, you can say, there was a guy I interviewed in my chambers who had one of his interests was martial arts. And so after we've done asking him all the legal questions, the boring stuff, I asked him, you've got a black belt in whatever it is, karate or whatever, tell me about that. How does that, it was a terrible question. How does that help you be a better barrister? It's like, even me, I was like, what kind of question is that? But this guy just went into a great story about how he got into martial arts, won a particular competition that he had that he was struggling with, and then he came third or something in the end. And that really taught him the power of resilience. I don't know whether he was making it up or not, or whether it was real, but because he clearly had a story attached to that part of his CV, it really landed and nailed it. We immediately took him on. He's passed away now, sadly, but it's just an example of what I'm saying. Just have stories for every part of your life.
Okay. No, no, that's amazing. Sorry to hear he's no longer with us, but we talked about him today. Hopefully, somewhere he's listening and smiling. Um, Amazing. So, a quick recap before we let everyone go, before we let you go, Kola, because we talked a lot today, right? We talked about what a lot of smart people get wrong about storytelling. You talked about your favorite tips when it comes to storytelling. There's four tips you shared with us. I'm gonna, list them here very quickly. You talked about a story bank. You also talked about a question bank, which is, kind of related. It's all in your arsenal, right? In terms of your prep that you need to do for interviews. And don't worry, not all stories have to have happy endings. That was my big aha moment. Stories are, the story bank is not really useful if you're not sharing it at the right time and the right place, and that in the context. And don't share that the first time in a big high stakes meeting. Do that properly at home, and there are different ways you talked about how to do that. So that you're not winging it. And I love this, also this comment that Paula made, because she talked about winging it as well, but Paula also said don't be afraid of silence, right? And there was a question about silence. The delay always seems longer to us as a candidate than
Yes,
it is in reality. It's like in my head it's 100 seconds, but it may be in a nanosecond.
definitely, definitely, and it actually makes people seem more considered when they are actually comfortable with a pause and then come and say something of value.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And there was a couple of studies that you mentioned, Kola, during our conversation. One of them I wrote down, the significant objects experiment. Do you remember roughly the name of the other experiments?
So the Stanford one is just a research paper. I can't remember the name of the particular science. I think it was a lady,
Hmm.
and that was the one that just said that, or just basically assessed that stories are 22 times more likely to be remembered than data. And then the other one was a Princeton study. Again, I don't remember the name of the gentleman, but that was the one that analyzed brain waves of storyteller and listener and actually saw that they basically mirrored each other exactly because everybody was in the same place mentally.
Okay, so I'm just writing this down, because some of us remember when we read something, or I remember something when I write it down.
Yeah.
Brainwaves during storytelling, right? So I'm guessing not just for the person sharing the story, but also the person listening. Um,
Yeah, they basically mirror each other, which showed that
mirror
they
each
were in
other.
exactly the same place.
Amazing.
Yuri something was the Princeton guy.
Okay, absolutely amazing. And finally, before we let you go, what is the one thing you'd like someone who's watching us today to walk away with?
Don't be scared of storytelling. No one is a natural storyteller. Nobody's born that way. Everybody acquires it at some point if they acquire it at all, through practice, through experience, whatever it is. So don't be afraid of it. Just start that story bank and just think, if I had to talk about this thing for 1 minute using a story, what would be the best story from my life that would show I have that ability or that skill? Just don't be scared of it. Just give it a go.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. This has been amazing. Getting a lot of thank yous here from our lovely audience. Thank you guys for being here. It means a lot. And of course, if this was useful to you, share this with a friend, a colleague who you think, maybe needs help when it comes to certain storytelling skills that honestly are human skills, right? As through time immemorial, we've been telling stories. And if they can help someone to land the kind of role or the job they're looking for, then it's completely worth it. Kola, this has been amazing. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your time
Always,
with us today.
always fun with you, so now.
Take care, everyone. Have a good Friday and a good weekend. And I shall see you at the same time next week. And I'm speaking with amazing leadership coach, Elise Finn. And our topic is going to be on this quiet quitting business, especially when you work in large companies. How do you do it? What do you say? What do you do? We're going to get into details over right there on Supercharged Fridays at the same time. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.